I'm Simon, and welcome to the first in a series of videos I'm putting together on making fire. We're going to be looking at tinders, natural tinders and man-made tinders, and we're going to be looking at different ways of igniting your fire. We're then going to go on to look at ways of building and maintaining your fire once you've got it going. So in this video, which is part one, we're going to be looking at natural tinders. I went out yesterday and gathered a load of tinders together in the rain. I've since dried them out, so hopefully they'll work. Now these are tinders that I like to use, which are available where I live in the east of England, so they're fairly easy to collect, to gather. The list of tinders you can use is huge, and it very much depends on whereabouts you live, and also what time of year. Some tinders you can harvest in the autumn, for example, but they're not really available as a usable tinder the rest of the year. So the first tinder we've got is good old birch bark. It's an obvious one. Most people have heard about the benefits of using birch bark as a tinder. It's full of resin, burns very well indeed, burns hot, and it burns for quite a long time as well. It'll catch a spark nicely. There's a little bit of preparation work needed, a little bit of processing in order for it to take that spark, but you know, really good as a natural tinder. So with birch bark, there's really two types of bark that you can collect. There are large sheets which you can get off dead birch, either limbs of birch that have fallen or dead standing, but don't go and cut this off a live tree. You know, all too often I see scars left behind by people just getting a knife and cutting out you know, a square of birch bark off a living tree. There's no need to do that. It's hard work, it scars the tree. It's much easier to find one that has fallen and has started to decay, because you can literally just put your hand in underneath it and pull great sheets of it off like this. Okay, so that's one type of birch bark that you can use. The second is to pull off the little wispy curly bits on the bark of a living birch tree. Okay, that won't damage it. It naturally sheds the bark anyway. So you're just peeling off bits that have already started to curl and come away, and you can just pull those bits away and you'll get much finer bits of birch. And this stuff will just take a spark as it is generally. So you can harvest that without, you know, even if you can't find a dead limb of birch, you know, you can collect that off a living silver birch tree. So to prepare your birch bark, you first need to scrape the surface of the bark and create a pile of fine shavings and dust. So just take your knife and scrape at the bark surface until you've produced a nice pile of shavings like this. Once you've got a nice little pile like that, you can then strike that, and that should take a spark really quite easily. Just like that. And then you can add other bits of birch bark to it. And then you're away. Get your fire on the go. Next up is fatwood. Fatwood you can harvest off pine trees. You can either get it from the root of dead pine trees, or you can harvest this from offshoots from the main trunk of a pine tree. You know, we've had quite a few trees that have come down of late in high winds. Near where I live, we have a lot of pine around where I live, a lot of Scots pine. And while I was out yesterday, this isn't one. This is one I've had for a while. But yesterday I found some. I managed to cut some limbs off the main trunk of a pine tree, and the centre of that, the very core, the very heartwood of that offshoot of that branch that comes off. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes has a very resinous core to it, where resinous sap is concentrated. And if you strip away the outer wood, you can expose that resinous centre, okay? And then you can take shavings of this, and it burns really well. You can smell the resin in there. It's a rich, resinous smell. So a little bit like with the birch bark, there's a little bit of processing you need to do with fatwood. You can't just light a spark, strike a spark onto this and expect it to catch. You need to scrape off some pieces as well. And I like to use the back of my knife and scrape off small, fine amounts. You could shave off bits with your blade as well, as long as they're really small, curly bits like this. Okay, so that's one way you can do it. But another way I like to do it is to take a pencil sharpener and just whittle down a bit of your fatwood to a pencil sort of size, and then using your pencil sharpener you can just make shavings of it. You know, a pencil sharpener is a tiny little thing. You can keep that in your tinder kit, and it's very, very easy then to process your fatwood, or in fact any sticks really. As long as you can fit a stick in there, you could process it into very thin shavings like this, which will catch a spark quite nicely. You can also buy fatwood either in pieces like this, or in shaving form. This is some by the company Light My Fire, who make fire steels, and they market this as Maya dust, they call it, but it's basically just shavings of fatwood. And that burns really hot, really resinous, and burns certainly long enough to get your secondary material on. Next up is thistle head, the downy seed head from a thistle, which you can collect in autumn once the flower head has gone, and you're just left with these really fine downy seeds. My daughter used to call them fairies because they look a little bit like a sort of fairy blowing around, okay? But they take a spark really well, and you can just literally collect those off the thistle head, pulling them off. You can take the whole seed head if you want, or you can just pull off the downy matter that's on there. Just obviously be careful, because thistles are quite sharp and prickly. Yeah, you can gather that, and that makes quite a nice tinder. Now the downy seed heads, what tends to happen is they burn really rapidly. They light very easily, but then they burn away really quickly like that, leaving, just on the outside basically, so leaving still a lot of material unburnt on the inside. So the best thing to do, I find, is to use that in conjunction with another tinder. I use a bit of birch bark with it often, and the beauty of this is that it lights very easily. So in windy conditions, or conditions where maybe the birch bark is a little bit damp on the outside, you can use some of this with a bit of birch bark, and the seed head will ignite the birch bark like that. Okay, next up I have some bracken, some dead, dry bracken. which I collected yesterday. It was a bit damp yesterday, but I've dried it out. And I've included this, but actually any sort of dead grasses are particularly good. Any dead vegetation that that's quite fibrous and you can sort of break up and tease apart works quite well and will take a spark, although it's not as reliable. So bracken is quite hard to light from a spark. You might get lucky and it might just take if the right spark lands in the right place on the driest bit. Sometimes it'll take. Grass is a bit better, but yeah, we'll give it a go anyway. Ah, there we go, we got it. So it takes a bit more effort, but it will go. Got a bit of flame there. So not my favourite tinder, but in an emergency it would do. And then lastly, I've included Cramp Ball fungus, or King Alfred's cakes it's sometimes known as. And this is a fungus which grows on ash trees, dead ash trees or diseased ash trees, and it's quite an interesting fungus because you can break it apart, and if it's dry, you can drop sparks onto this and it will glow. So although it won't create a flame as such, it will create an ember, and you can blow on that, and that will slowly build and build, and then you can put that into a tinder bundle and you can blow that into flame. Okay, so on its own it won't create a flame, but it's quite useful because it will take quite a dull spark. I'll talk a little bit more about methods of ignition in another video, but you know, that's a useful one if you're using traditional fire lighting methods. Okay. So we have an ember. The key now is to get that into some nest material and blow it into flame. There we go. Fire. Well, I've only just touched on a few different tinders here. You know, there are loads, as I said earlier, loads and loads of different tinders that you could use around the world. Cedar bark is a very good one. Reed mace is also very good. The flower head off the reed mace makes a great tinder. There's loads. You know, like I say, I've only just touched on the ones that I use because they're readily available to me where I live in the east of England. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please hit the like button below. That would be great. And don't forget to tune in next week where we're going to be taking a look at man-made tinders. Thanks for watching. Take care.